Welcome to another episode of the SkyTail Insights podcast. I'm Annie Robertson Hockey, president of SkyTail, and I'm excited to be here today with Will MacInnis, who is co-CEO of a dental platform called Cliffridge. So thank you for being here and joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. Excited to chat.
So Cliffridge Specialty Partners, your platform. Um, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about when you started it and what led you to start Cliffridge, and a little bit more about your path there.
Definitely. Yeah, happy to chat about that. So we started the company about 2 years ago, myself and my co-founder, Ananya. We had spent a couple of years working together previously at a startup called Vial, which was a software and services business serving the clinical trials industry. With that business, we built a similar platform, so kind of a practice management oriented business in the clinical trial space, serving dermatology and ophthalmology. And at a certain point, decided that we wanted to, branch out and do our own thing. We came on to obviously dental's been an industry that's been rolled up for a very long period of time. We kind of stumbled into orthodontics and pediatric dentistry after chatting with a bunch of folks throughout the industry. And it was really, I think, two things that led us to it. One is there is a strong desire from specialists to be affiliated with a DSO that is oriented around their specialty. I think a lot of orthodontists and pediatric dentists who join general platforms feel like they are kind of an ancillary add-on to the broader platform. And so there's a much larger willingness to affiliate with platforms that are led or at least oriented around a specific specialty. So that was bucket number one, was just kind of a sentiment in the market from doctors. And number two is, if you think about the different referral pathways throughout the dental ecosystem, one of the strongest, if not the strongest referral pathways is from pediatric dentistry into orthodontics. And so just from a synergy standpoint and thinking about if you're going to pick different specialties, which two go the best together, those two made sense for us to go after. So that's kind of how we landed on those two specialties.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then, is it specifically pediatric orthodontics?
Roughly 75 to 80% of our patients are children. So within the orthodontics business, within pediatrics, it's 100%. So across the platform, we do primarily serve a patient base that is under the age of 18, but we do also see adult orthodontic cases at a lot of our practices as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Those are two of our favorite specialty areas over here on the SkyTail team. Both really fun practices. Typically have really passionate leaders, and also really good business, candidly. So it's a nice trifecta. So Ananya, your co-founder, your co-CEO. Candidly, one of the things I'm asked a lot, sort of less in my role at SkyTail, but sort of more within the capacity of my former life as a founder, is to whether or not to have a co-founder, and then how you divide and conquer titles. I'm curious. The two of you met at Vial. How did you know he was the right person to start a company with? And yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We spoke to a lot of people before we started our business who had done similar things and received varying degrees of feedback, I think primarily based on personal experiences that people had, both for and
Always.
against.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Both for and against doing kind of the co-founder, co-CEO, particularly having two people with the title of CEO. I
Yeah.
think even some of our investors were a little bit wary of that setup. One of the benefits of my and Ananya's working relationships is that we have had a working relationship for a long period of time. And so at Vial, I was the CFO, Ananya was the COO. It was a very small executive team. It was basically the three of us being, the two of us and the CEO. And so I spent a couple of years working very, very closely with them. And so I think we knew going in that we were going to have, at least from like a soft skill perspective, really strong overlap. And I'd say the second thing is, and this, I think is maybe just a piece of advice for anyone looking to do a kind of a co-CEO setup, is making sure that you have skill sets that are complementary as opposed to overlapping. So my background is in investment banking and private equity. So I've handled a lot of the fundraising and M&A and business development. and, kind of the finance function within our organization. Whereas Ananya, his background is more in consulting and operations. And so he does a lot of day-to-day organic growth and operations in general.
Yeah. As a, fellow co-CEO, former co-CEO, um, I mean, one of the reasons that we chose this, it can be, to your point, a little bit confusing, but people typically want to speak to the CEO. And so the ability to sort of be able to tag in and tag out and have, someone go to these conferences and someone go and really candidly, like, have a North Star never really being on the same phone call in a way.
Right.
I think no, that was like a driving reason for us. And as long as you have very clear roles and responsibilities and even like decision making frameworks. I'm a nerd about decision making frameworks, like who ultimately has that decision power.
Right.
I think it can be a really nice model.
Agreed. We actually talk to people a lot who are looking to set up these types of businesses. And that's always a question. How do you guys, did you have a management agreement? Did you have a list when you
Mhm.
joined? And I do actually think that that probably would have been, I mean, not that we actually, frankly, haven't had any major issues as co-CEOs, but again, having the benefit of working with Ananya for a number of years, I think we didn't necessarily need that. But I do think for people that are entering into a partnership with someone new, having a very clear outline of this is how we settled it, issues,
Yeah.
and maybe it's hey, issues related to these topics, I have ultimate decision making. Issues related to these topics, you have ultimate decision making. But
Yep.
something that helps with that, I think, up front is probably helpful to have.
And candidly, good for like many forms of leadership too, including your direct reports. Like, what do they ultimately have decision making power on, even if you maybe don't necessarily agree every time? Because guess what? That's like how learning happens. It turns out. Totally, it is in most things. Clarity is a helpful beast. So shifting gears a little bit towards DSO world. To your point, it's been consolidating for a few decades now. Also continues to evolve and transform. How would you say, other than sort of your specific specialties, like what do you think makes your model different?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's kind of the finance slash numbers answer, and we can get into the
Yeah.
details. And then there's, I think, maybe a softer answer as well in terms of how we interact with and partner with our doctor partners. On the kind of numbers and structure side, if you look at the evolution of the DSO landscape over a long period of time, there has been an evolution um, in the structure of the partnerships. And so traditionally, a lot of models, if you think about the V1 of practice management, it was 100% buyouts of practices where doctors would then convert from 100% owner of their business to a straight W-2 employee making a salary. Those models failed for a variety of reasons, but I think the main reason in hindsight that those models did not succeed is there was not very strong alignment with the doctors. And it turns out that if you're entering into a business where all the revenue is generated by, the one or two or three doctors in the practice, it's incredibly important to have that person feeling very good about coming to work every day, feeling incentivized, feeling rewarded, and seeing the financial fruits of the growth that hopefully you as the DSO are helping to drive. So, the partnership model has evolved. We do what's called a JV model, which means that when we do a partnership, we only buy 60 to 70% of a practice, and then we have the doctors rolling 30 to 40%, and then they have the opportunity to monetize the remaining ownership through, recaps with future owners down the line whenever we have new investors coming in, which we found to be a very, very helpful model from a number of perspectives, but really just creating that partnership feel with the day to day. So every time there's a change that needs to take place or a conversation that needs to happen, it can be framed within the context of, hey, we're equal partners here. We're both going to be feeling the pain or seeking or seeing the benefits of whatever changes we make. So it makes those conversations, I think, a lot easier. And then the softer thing I would say about our particular model and maybe how we're different from others is, I would say generally, if you look across the DSO landscape, particularly with some of our larger partners, I would describe their models as kind of a one size fits all templated approach. What they'll do is they'll partner with a practice, they'll install an office manager that's friendly to the DSO corporate entity. They have a very specific way of doing things. They'll, have metrics that they want the dentist to hit that are standardized across the ecosystem. And that works for some practices, but it really doesn't work for others. And I think what we found is that every single doctor builds their practice in a different way. And above all else, what you want to do is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So keep the existing processes and systems that have made the practice successful in place and augment where you can. What that ultimately does for us is it creates more of a bespoke model, which I think frankly is more work for us because we approach every
Definitely.
single
Yeah. Yeah.
partnership and every single practice in a different way. But I think that what that yields is kind of a unique growth playbook for every single practice, which I think has been very successful for us. And ultimately, I think happier staff, happier doctor, which again ultimately yields higher quality outcome for the patients and better growth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can definitely see why your practices would love that. That said, for you, it really is. I mean, then it's sort of copy, obviously you're getting synergies where you can, but, candidly, a lot more work. So you sort of have more of a bespoke approach to each of your practices. Do you think that in some way will kind of cap your growth? Like, how do you think about that in terms of, at SkyTime, I'm always like, okay, team, think about this problem when it's like 10 times the size, 100 times the size, like how will it work
Right.
then? Like, how do you think about scaling?
100%. I guess what I would say is there's a couple things that are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
One of them is we do, and we're in the process of doing this right now, but we want all of our practices on unified practice management software, which,
Okay.
as we know, throughout every industry of healthcare can be a huge pain point for doctors who hate switching practice management softwares. But for us, the data integrity is so important to be able to draw insights and enact change and at least have informed decision making at the practices that we're partnered with. So there's a couple things that I would say we put in kind of the non-negotiable bucket. But beyond that, I guess the way that we think about it is having a staff that comes to work happy every day and having a doctor that is motivated and incentivized through a strong partnership will ultimately yield significantly more organic growth than say, forcing doctors to use a cheaper consumable that might drive, 50 basis points of margin improvement. And so thinking long term as opposed to thinking short term is really the approach that we've taken in prioritizing, I think, longer term partnerships and organic growth over some of those shorter term synergies that you might typically underwrite in a private equity situation that may come over the longer term. But yeah, just striking that balance, I think, is important.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I mean, even going back to the integrated PMS system, one of the things in terms of change management, which is like turns out the day job of consultants is, candidly, human like for every change, there has to be an answer of like what's in it for me. And if part of what joining your platform gives is, oh, by the way, you practice one can learn so much from you practice two. We're sharing best practices so we all rise together. Like having that consolidated view of the platform in addition to the individual view of each of the practices performance, like that benefits everyone. And so, it's almost like, yes, this is a vitamin and let's just call a spade a spade. It's not going to be the most tasty vitamin for a little while, but like I promise it's worth the payoff. I think like even with that one, which just kind of again can be tricky. There's the
Right.
reasoning is so clear.
But exactly as you described it, it's best practices. It's also just leveraging regional data. So especially as you're building scale within a local market, which is something that we are very focused on in the markets that we're in, being able to show benchmarks for everything from a pricing of an Invisalign case to
Mhm.
average wage of a front office person to demographic data, where are the patients coming from, what neighborhoods are we drawing from, how do we target our marketing effectively based on that information. Those insights are so massively valuable to us and to our doctor owners, and you need to be on a unified software in order to draw that
Yeah.
data,
Yeah.
essentially.
To what extent, this is something I've been thinking a lot about, like, to what extent do you share platform-wide data with each practice, or is that something that it's sort of a more kind of opt-in select group of statistics that you're sharing out platform wide?
I mean, I'd say there's two answers to that question. One is we do a monthly call with each dentist, with each owner, kind of like role JV equity owner of our
You.
practices
Yeah.
to go through financial performance from the prior month, key performance indicators, drivers of practice success. And as part of that, we'll often share out, hey, this is what we're seeing across the network, this is the goal that we think we could eventually hit, and here's how we think we can help get you there. And this is us looking at a dozen practices across the region that you're in. So a lot of it does get shared out by virtue of these touch points that
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
at a regular cadence with our dentists. And then, of course, by request, like let's say we're hiring someone new at a practice, someone will say, hey, what should I offer this person? I'm thinking of offering,
Right.
$30 an hour. How does that rank up? So at
Right.
request, we're of course happy to share all that information as well.
Right. Yeah, I wish I had someone to call for questions like that. That would be that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, well, good. So, shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that you were mentioning earlier, and I think is so true, is especially in provider services, like happy provider equals happy patient equals happy you, Will. Um, so the quality, of it, that provider in the relationship really matters when you're vetting, potential partners, because obviously like the dating game is going both ways when you're looking at a practice to partner with. Are there specific qualities that you are looking for? I'm sure you now have a decent amount of pattern recognition, like anything in particular that you've seen tends to garner success.
100%. I guess one of the things we like to start with is clinical quality, which for us is the most
Mm, mm,
important. And so that is, typically in a consumer business, which I would call dentistry kind of consumer adjacent. It's at the intersection of consumer and healthcare. That'll typically show up in anything from Google reviews to Yelp
yeah,
reviews. So you can kind of get a good sense for quality just based on that. And then we also have a firm that comes in and looks at, actual case files and
great.
compares them against what's submitted to insurance and things like that, just to make sure. But that I'd say is kind of the hard skill that we look at. Beyond that, it's a lot of soft skills and it's a lot of feeling people out. It
Yeah,
is, people come in asking for a massive payout and they don't want to stay on long term and they're focused on the numbers. You can kind of get the sense that maybe that's not the right partnership that you want to enter into.
yeah,
Um, the conversations that have felt the best for us are when we come in and show the growth that we've been able to drive at other practices post partnership. And there's a real excitement from the doctor, and they have a bunch of questions about the marketing and what can we do for my practice and how can I solve these issues. Those are the conversations that you start to feel, okay, this could be a really good partner for us,
yeah.
less the ones that are focused around financials and numbers and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's in many ways why, and I will not. Full disclosure, I'm not a banker, but that is why our team, we tend to encourage folks to start thinking and go about going to market far before the thought process is to retire. I think there can be sort of this misconception that it's like, oh, you sell and then you go on your merry way, and like candidly, then what is the buyer buying, especially if you make up a
Exactly.
large part of the practice. And so, hearing that it's folks who still have energy in the tank and still want to make their mark, maybe just with more resources behind them, and they still have, years more of work to do. I think, for those listening, it's something I think is a really valuable takeaway.
I 100% agree. I think the traditional kind of sign a 5-year agreement when I'm 60 years old and then retire at 65. I think DSOs these days are starting to move away from those types of agreements, particularly at the full valuations that you might think about in the market,
Yeah.
and are shifting more towards finding doctors who are young, want to partner early. And the reality is, if you are a DSO that can bring a tremendous amount of value to a practice, and you compare the side by side of, hey, this is what you're going to make over even like a 15 to 20-year period, going it alone with this growth, with these growth assumptions and this versus partner with us. Let's, max out your current practice over the next couple of years. Let's open up a satellite office. Let's get you involved in other investment opportunities within the organization. There's a very clear with the best performing DSOs, you can actually make quite a bit more as a doctor
Yeah.
partnering early versus, going it alone and then selling ahead of retirement.
Yeah, and like sort of the proof of concept is the onus is on you to prove that out. And I think you've clearly probably had success with just having those numbers and those answers ready. Because I find most people are very reasonable if you just show them the data, right? Um,
100%.
we had one client on the consulting side who, um, I think was sort of known for not necessarily like adopting whatever the private equity shop was telling him or her to do. And we had a conversation with them, and they were like, I mean, if you show me the data and it looks good, like totally. And we were like, we can't really argue with that,
Hard
like
to argue. Hard
it's
to
really
argue with
hard to
that.
argue that. This is a little feedback that we took back with us, um, as well. Well, great. I mean, how do you sort of taking a step back, like how do you define success for you at Cliffridge? Because I'm sure that that's also a piece of the kind of vision, um, image that you're talking to these providers about as well.
It's a good question. I guess I would say a couple things. One would be delivering on our end of the bargain. These dentists that we partner with are entrusting us with businesses that they've often built for decades and with staff relationships. Many of these staff have been working there for 20 plus years and want to continue coming to work every day, want to feel good about coming to work every day. So it's delivering on the volume growth, marketing, generating savings on the back end, making the lives of the staff on site easier. So introducing processes and systems that are taking some of that burden away from the dentist and from the staff on site. So I think that would be bucket one, is just kind of delivering on what we say we're going to do. And number two would be NPS scores of the doctors and the staff. Do they feel happy coming to work every day? It's so obvious to us that happy staff, good culture, and happy doctors, this yields lower turnover, staff turnover on site, better patient care.
Yeah.
So really making sure that people are happy, I think is how we think about success for our business.
Yeah. The first one is so real. It's someone's like figurative child that you're taking on. I mean, I think about this with my employees, right? It's like, oh shoot, I have to pay for all their kids to, college tuition. It's like,
Yeah.
like that's the responsibility that I feel most of all. And, it's a big thing to entrust, a partner with it, not only something that you've built, but also the biggest financial transaction probably of their lives. And that's, it's a nice vote of confidence in you, you Will, and your co-founder. In terms of, I think you're sort of were intuiting this with one of your earlier question or answers about changes on the back end to make the lives of your employees and providers better, and that sort of like leads me, of course, think about technology and AI in part because I'm thinking about, oh my goodness, if my team's brains can be used not for like downloading data, it can be used for like thinking about the data, right? Like there's all these incredible gifts that technology and AI will bring. How are you thinking about that? Are there parts of your business that you think are more likely to shift kind of sooner rather than later in terms of, operating approach, just given what's now increasingly available to us?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to go to conferences for the past, I'd say, 18 months, and half the headline talks are AI in dental, AI in orthodontics, and how to
Yeah.
leverage AI in your business. And I will caveat my answer by saying that I am not the tech person in our business. I would say that Ananya, my co-founder, is significantly more well-read and understands, I think, these tools. But what I can definitely say, I can say a couple things. One, every time I get back from these conferences, I go to Ananya and say, "Hey, we need to be doing more in AI," and he says, "Hey, it's not that simple. Relax. There's a
He's like,
lot more."
yes. And what do you mean by that?
Exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. So I would say that, but and so we're constantly thinking about it, and there's a lot of tools out there. There's remote, virtual front desk assistants that I think some DSOs are demoing. I think there's some interesting stuff going on the back end with revenue cycle management that I would say is
yeah,
probably one of the more near term things that we would think about deploying. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. I would say it's more around process automation today than it is anything else. And one of the really uh, difficult things about healthcare services in general is that people are entrusting their medical care into the staff. And so when you call up an office, or let's say you're a parent looking to schedule your child for an orthodontic treatment, you're going to go spend thousands of dollars on braces, and you get an AI tool on the other end trying to schedule you. That doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. And so
Mhm.
some of these front-facing tools and some of these more, I'd say, medically focused or external customer-facing tools, I think are going to be more difficult to implement.
Yeah.
Maybe that you start to see more of those over an 18 to 24-month time period. But we personally have evaluated those and don't feel that they're ready for the market yet. Where
Yeah.
I view more opportunity in the near term for AI is things like revenue cycle management, automating some billing,
Yeah.
accounting work on the back end, things like that, maybe claim submissions for insurance. I think there could be some of those.
Procurement also
Oh yeah,
getting worse,
exactly.
you know?
Procurement.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
I think there could be some tools that could work in those areas.
yeah, yeah. Well, you have a few stakeholders, right? So it's like every single decision, stakeholder one is like your LPs and your fiduciary responsibility to create, efficiencies, et cetera. And so maybe optimization, sure. Okay, stakeholder number two is your employees. Stakeholder number three is your patients. And so, like, I think what you've said really eloquently is for every single decision in this avenue, specifically making sure that it works for every single one of those groups, not just one. Because I think I think both you and I spend a lot of time in San Francisco. You live in San Francisco. I split time between there and Dallas. And I think that there can be a knee jerk tech good, AI good. And I think that's often the case, but much like every single other tool, it's really the why behind it and making sure it actually is in service with your company and your mission and your values and all of these other things. I say this as someone who loves AI, but still, I think it's important to scrutinize every tool with equal rigor, if you will.
Agreed. And this is funny that you mentioned SF. I do think the general consensus for folks here is to just deploy technology as fast as possible. And it's important to remember that not everyone feels the same way. Um, there's Waymos all over the roads here. And I've had a number of friends and family come into town. And I assume that everyone wants to ride in the Waymos, and then you offer it up, and some people are interested, and some people say, "Dude, I'm not getting in that thing." So I think there's a
Yeah.
balance of yeah, understanding what people want and when to deploy it.
Well, I'll one up you because, in Dallas, despite not being Silicon Valley, they have these little robots called like Diana or something that deliver your food,
Is that
like
food
Uber
delivery?
Eats. Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
was walking down the sidewalk the other day, and I had like this weird, as a driver, now I'm used to Waymo's, but as a walker, I hadn't yet like navigated a sidewalk with one.
Uh-huh.
Fortunately, it really, really gave me the decision making power. So I got, to sort of pass first.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, across all of my conversations, I have a few just rapid fire questions that I think it's so interesting to ask, all of our guests. Just quickly to kind of wrap up our conversation today. This one is a two-parter. What's the most fun part of your job? Be honest. And what's the hardest part? You can take those in
Wow.
whatever order, whatever order compels you.
Those are good questions. I would say the hardest part of the job has been building the central infrastructure, which a lot of what we've been doing as particularly in year one, I think we're now entering, end of year two. I think we're starting to feel really good, but it was a lot of building the plane as you're flying it. And, I do give a lot of credit to our early doctors for deciding to partner with us, even though they knew we only had 3 people on staff at
Yeah.
our central team. And we were very candid about that in our partnerships early on, saying, "Hey, look, a lot of this stuff is going to come down the line in year 2 and 3. It's not day one. You're not going to be on the highest tier Invisalign savings plan and things like that." But building the infrastructure, which again, Ananya's not on this call, but I give him all the credit. We have a fantastic team. and we've been able to centralize most, if not all, of the functions that we would like to have in house, which has been each one has been such a huge lift. So that's probably been the most painful and most challenging thing that we've had to do since starting the business. The most fun, I think, is kind of goes hand in hand with that, has been watching the team grow and building the team over time. We have such a fantastic group of people, not only at our central team at corporate, but also at all of our sites. And we, of course, go and visit with our staff ahead of closing a partnership, after closing a partnership, and then we'll be, whenever we can, whenever we're in town, we'll try and stop by. And it's always so great to spend time with the staff and watch the team growing as we add more practices. So for me, that's been one of the most fun parts of the job.
Yeah, I love it. And is your team distributed, or is your sort of centralized team, is that a remote workforce?
It is. I think we actually only, of our whole central team, I think we only have two people living in the same city. So we could not
Yeah,
be more disparate. We actually just
yeah.
did our first corporate offsite last week, and we finally got everyone together, which was super fun. But
Fun.
yeah, most of our time spent together is on Zoom.
So, well, given the fact that all of your clients are sort of all over, at least no one has FOMO. If anything, you
Exactly.
could have FOMO of your practices because they get to hang out together. Um,
Exactly. And Ananya is in New York, which is where most of our practices are, and I'm in San Francisco. So I definitely have FOMO. But I'm there enough where I get to see the doctors and check in.
yeah, yeah. When your team is east of you, as I know well, you always wake up to a lot of excitement each morning.
A hundred
But
percent.
at least the day can end quietly. Um,
Exactly.
right. And then, the final question I'll ask is, what are you most proud of when you look back?
Oh, I mean, I guess I would say, going back to my prior answer, being able to convince some of those early joiners to join, even though we were, uh, if you think about the way these businesses typically get started, it's been interesting for me as we've met more DSOs. It's typically one of two things, right? It's either a dentist who built a network over like a 15 to 20-year period where
Mhm.
one business was successful, they added a second, or after a couple years. And it's typically, a lot of times they don't even take on equity financing. It's just
Yeah.
saving money and then buying up their competitor and then launching a new practice. And over a very long period of time, you start to gain scale. Or
Right.
so that's on the one extreme. On the other extreme, you have, big, large cap private equity fund putting $500 million onto a balance sheet and letting a seasoned CEO hire a multi-million dollar G&A base to go out and do M&A day one. They have a captive pipeline. They've got 20 people on staff. They're burning cash. As a small company, we didn't have
Mhm.
the benefit of being able to do that upfront. And so it's been very interesting to thread the needle and
Yeah.
convince people to join, get from 0 to 1, build the team.
Yeah.
Okay, we did another deal that can justify another hiring at Central. It's been this
Right.
kind of like small step function growth, which has been challenging but really fun. So I would say that is something that we're super proud of, being able to do that. And then the second thing I would say is, people typically think about private equity backed platforms as being, there's a lot of headlines around negativity and impact on businesses and impact of patients. I do feel very good about the business decisions that we've made and
Mhm.
the way that that has flown through to patients. We see a lot of Medicaid patients. We're actually doing a transaction right now where we're going to be adding Medicaid back to that practice. We've never cut price, or we've never raise prices at any of our locations, which I'm sure will change over time, but it's been 2 years. We're very
Right. Right.
focused on price increases. And, we don't do staff cuts or fire staff when we do deals. So I do
Yeah.
feel pretty good about the way that we've approached building the business as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I mean, much like we were just talking about AI and technology, private equity does not necessarily mean private equity good, private equity bad. Business could be an incredible thing for a company and making it, a well-oiled machine that does incredible error-free care with a highly, well compensated provider in the right way. It can actually be a really lovely thing in many ways for businesses. So that's wonderful to hear that in your case the two are going hand in hand.
Agreed.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I think that ends my list of questions for now. But really appreciate your hopping on and sharing more about what you're up to at the fridge.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.